History begins when humans take action. Plants and animals have their own development, are subject to natural laws and participate in various events. However, history only happens to them in the context of human interaction. History is what is passed down. There is also history before the time of writing, but it can only be captured and described through discoveries. This is called rehistory. It is important that the facts of the time, names, places and so on, are transmitted, but how this occurs, for example on stone, bronze, papyrus and so on, is not important. Additionally, a language must exist to transmit and record history. Let us begin our small overview with Egypt. Because the Nile floods annually, the people living in the Nile Valley, which is surrounded by deserts, had to manage tasks by organizing, administering, and acquiring knowledge. Calendar, geometry, land surveying, writing. Around 3000 BC, larger administrative districts were formed, which were united under the divinely revered pharaoh from 2640 BC. The state was governed by officials, scribes, and priests who could read and write hieroglyphs. They were responsible for the administration of justice and tax collection. Art served the cult of gods and the dead, for example in temples. The Egyptians achieved great technical feats with simple tools in building the pyramids. Around 1450 BC, under Thutmose III, the Egyptian Empire reached its greatest extent, encompassing the Nile Valley up to the Fourth Cataract and the Mediterranean coastal regions. Barely 100 years later, decline began, contributed to by the internal turmoil arising from the religious reforms of Pharaoh Amenhotep III. He worshipped only one god, the sun god Aton, after whom he named himself Akhenaten. After his death, the reforms were revoked. In the last millennium BC, Egypt could hardly defend itself against invaders from the Near East. Several great empires conquered Egypt. Now on to ancient Greeks. The Greeks settled the Mediterranean. In the second millennium BC, the Indo-European tribes of the Aeolians, Achaeans, and Ionians migrated into Greece from the northern Balkans. They could not form a large state like the Egyptians, as the land contained many small river valleys and coastal landscapes, separated by high, impassable mountains. Thus, around strongly fortified castles, small cities and city-states emerged, all of which were independent. The most powerful fortress was Mycenae. The subsequent Dorians subjugated the Mycenaean culture, leading the already settled Greeks to also colonize the many smaller islands and the western coast of Asia Minor, present-day Turkey. Around 800 BC, the aristocracy took over power from the kings in the city-states. Due to the limited availability of arable land, many people had to emigrate from their own cities along the coasts of the Mediterranean and Black Seas. They founded daughter cities, colonies, which they governed themselves. They maintained close contact with the mother cities. Though their shared culture, they felt like one people and called themselves Hellenes, from Greek Hellenes, and they had a phonetic script. Now to Solon. In the 7th century BC, an aristocracy ruled, meaning that in Athens the aristocracy, who owned large estates, held a strong position. With the introduction of a money economy, many small farmers became impoverished, had to borrow money from the aristocracy, and even had to give their family members as debt to slaves to the rich. As the unrest grew, the nobleman Solon was to find a solution. In 594 BC, Solon abolished that slavery and gave Athens a constitution stating that all citizens could participate in public life. However, influence was strongly graded according to income. This paved the way for democracy. However, since the rich were still favored, Pisistratos managed to establish a tyranny, a one-man rule. His sons ruled only by force, were thus killed. Since that time, tyranny has come to mean a rule of force. Only under the Athenian Cleisthenes was a certain degree of justice achieved, by dividing the entire city area into 3 regions: the city, the countryside, and the coast, which were further subdivided into 10 tribes, so-called Pylai. The individual districts, the city, countryside, and coast, were made the government by lot for a certain time. As after the Persian Wars, because the Athenian population provided important military service, as well as during the Persian Wars, even the poorest citizens could actively participate in political life and received daily allowances for this. However, out of a total population of 300,000 in Attica, only about 10,000 men were involved in politics. The rest lived outside the city, or had no citizenship rights at all. Under Pericles, elected annually as strategos from 443 to 420 BC, Athens experienced a political and cultural golden age. The reconstruction of the Acropolis. Significant poets, philosophers, and sculptors such as Sophocles, Socrates, and Phidias. Athens claimed political, economic, and military hegemony over its alliance. In 431 BC, a great war began between Sparta and its allies against Athens. Sparta became the dominant power in Greece after its victory over Athens and attempted to eliminate democracy. Its rule of force was overthrown by Thebes in 371 BC, which rose to great power for a short time. Alexander. In the 4th century BC, the major Greek cities, which would be Athens, Sparta, and Thebes, lost power due to their disunity, making them vulnerable to external attacks. This was exploited by Philip of Macedon, who conquered Greece with a victory in 338 BC. The Greeks had to recognize him as the supreme commander and intended war against the Persians. His son Alexander, 336 to 323 BC, conquered the entire Persian Empire up to India. In his world empire, he sought to merge the people, mass wedding. He introduced a unified currency and enabled a flourishing period for the great empire through uninterrupted trades. His early death due to malaria led to power struggles from which three major successor kingdoms emerged: Egypt under Ptolemy, Syria under Seleucus, and Macedonia and Greece.